You sit in a room filled with advice. Words cover the walls like wallpaper. Sticky notes, motivational quotes, even photos you printed from Pinterest of people living perfect lives. The mirror on the wall is cracked, but you keep looking anyway. You hope that if you try hard enough, all your problems will disappear, and you'll finally see someone whole, someone like them. You weren't lazy or lost. You were trying. You didn't want to become that girl. You just wanted a life that didn't hurt to live. You were trying to fix what they told you was wrong, trying to outrun the feeling that maybe, deep down, you're not enough. You clicked video after video, read book after book, bought course after course, hoping one would finally show you the version of yourself that feels like home. But no matter how much you grow, the emptiness lingers. Because somewhere along the way, healing stopped being about peace and became a way to disappear. This isn't self-help anymore. It's self-erasure, disguised as transformation. Welcome to the Synaptic Soul Diary, a soft space between science and self, where your inner world is both studied and sacred. Today, we're unraveling the quiet burnout behind self-help. That feeling of never arriving, no matter how many morning routines you try, how many podcasts you finish, or how many highest self playlists you save. Through the lenses of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, we'll explore what really happens when self-improvement becomes survival, and why your brain might mistake endless growth for safety. Because sometimes, becoming your best self is just your nervous system trying not to be abandoned. Your brain evolved to crave certainty and safety. When you're overwhelmed or unsure who you are, it clings to anything that offers a solution. That's why self-help feels so soothing. It promises clarity where there's only fog. Every time you come across a piece of content that promises transformation, 10 habits to become her, the real reason you're not healing, your brain lights up. That's dopamine. But the dopamine doesn't come from changing your life. It comes from thinking about changing your life. It's not transformation. It's fantasy dressed up as productivity. The anterior cingulate cortex is watching for mistakes, scanning your past and future for threats to your new identity. The medial prefrontal cortex loops obsessively around self-referential thoughts, imagining how your ideal self would speak, act, eat, glow. You're narrating yourself from the outside, shaping a version of you that will finally be allowed to exist. But here's the catch. Your brain is always watching. This overactivation can lead to paralysis by analysis. You get stuck in the loop, consuming more, planning more, and never arriving. Through a process called neuroplasticity, your nervous system reshapes itself based on repetition, not truth. And whatever you repeat, you start to believe. So if your daily ritual is fixing yourself, that becomes your identity. It doesn't care if a thought is healthy or helpful. It only cares if it's familiar. Over time, your brain doesn't learn peace. It learns that perfection is the price of safety. And even once there's nothing left to fix, your brain will keep trying anyway. Because it's no longer about growth, it's about survival in disguise. In one of the most well-known studies on choice overload, Iyengar and Lepper found that people offered too many options. Even when those options were good, were less likely to make a choice and less satisfied with the choice they made. Too many paths can feel like no path at all. The modern self-help space offers 1,000 ways to become her. Journaling techniques, nervous system resets, inner child reprogramming, the only routine that ever worked for me. And this results in constant decision fatigue, a loop of second-guessing, starting over, switching methods, and while the surface message is, you can change, the subconscious message is you're still not doing it right. That uncertainty alone is enough to trigger your threat detection system. Because your brain doesn't just want improvement, it wants clarity. And clarity doesn't come from more options. It comes from internal permission to begin. Think about it. You planned the perfect week, you made a list, you lit a candle, and yet the next morning, you woke up feeling behind before the day even started. Your brain loves the idea of healing. It floods you with dopamine for planning, researching, imagining change. But real healing isn't exciting. It's repetitive, quiet, sometimes boring. That's why it's easier to keep consuming self-help than to actually apply it. Your brain thinks you're doing something, even when you're still standing in place. We all want to believe that if we just try hard enough, we'll finally feel like we're enough. But self-help doesn't always come from self-love. Sometimes it comes from fear. Fear of being unworthy, unseen, left behind. So we build our worth around effort. Many of us were praised for being good, quiet, helpful. We learned that love came through performance, through perfection. So when we grow up and start seeking healing, we do it the same way. By trying to become better, more palatable, more productive, we learn to fix. And when healing becomes a to-do list, it stops being healing. It becomes another way to manage the discomfort of being human. Psychology gives us the language for why you keep chasing this version of yourself. When you're watching That Girl routines, or obsessing over the idea of becoming your best self, you're not just being influenced, you're reconstructing your identity in real time. Your brain engages in self-referential thinking. How do I measure up? And social comparison. Am I enough yet? But the more you compare, the more distorted your self-concept becomes. Back in 1987, psychologist Higgins introduced the idea of self-discrepancy. Basically, the emotional tension we feel when there's a gap between who we are and who we think we should be. However, that gap doesn't motivate healing. It creates shame. So what do? You compare yourself, you try harder, and eventually, it can lead to chronic anxiety, low self-esteem, and even depression. Because your brain starts interpreting it as a threat to your worth. That's where perfectionism comes from, not as a personality trait, but as a defense mechanism. It's your inner child saying, if I just become her, maybe then I'll be safe. Maybe then I'll be loved. And that is self-abandonment, dressed as glow-up culture. Psychologist Carl Rogers said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." But most self-help skips over that first part. Higgins also showed that self-compassion is more strongly correlated with lasting behavioral change, emotional regulation, and resilience than self-discipline. And long before TikTok routines existed, Leon Festinger described social comparison theory in 1954. Showing how we constantly measure ourselves against others to figure out how we're doing. But in today's world, that comparison never ends, and we're usually comparing up, which leaves us feeling small. Modern clinical research also connects perfectionism to burnout, disordered eating, and identity confusion, because when being better becomes your identity, rest starts to feel like failure. That voice in your head that says, you should be doing more, it probably doesn't even sound like you. It sounds like the version of you who was trying to stay safe. So of course you overthink. Of course you keep improving. That pattern was never about success. It was about survival. You weren't trying to become your highest self. You were trying to become someone they'd finally choose. But healing doesn't mean becoming better. It means remembering you weren't broken in the first place. Philosophy has always asked, what does it mean to be yourself in a world constantly telling you to become someone else? In today's self-help trap, that question becomes more urgent, because the more you chase a perfected version of yourself, the further you slip away from who you actually are. Existentialist philosopher Martin Heidegger introduced the concept of Geworfenheit, or throneness. It means we're all born into a world we didn't choose, with circumstances we never asked for. So we try to cope. We latch on to ideas, routines, and identities that give us direction. And self-help offers exactly that, a roadmap. It says, here's who to become, here's how to live. But when you follow that roadmap too closely, you stop asking, is this really me? Philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre warned of inauthentic living, when your identity is shaped more by social expectations than your true self. And that's the trap of the highest self. Because when your healing journey becomes an aesthetic, when your inner peace is tied to productivity, when your worth depends on discipline, then you're not healing, you're performing. Philosophical counseling and identity theory both support this. A 2021 study in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology found that self-alienation, the sense of being a stranger to yourself, increases when individuals overly conform to idealized self-concepts pushed by media or societal standards. This reflects Sartre's idea of bad faith, where people betray themselves to avoid the anxiety of true freedom and authenticity. The more you chase who you should be, the more disconnected you become from who you already are. Ever felt like even your healing is manufactured? Like your morning routine needs to look beautiful to count, or your growth doesn't matter unless someone else sees it? Have you ever looked at a Pinterest board of your dream self and felt ache instead of motivation? That's your soul mourning the version of you you've been abandoning in the name of self-improvement. Philosophy doesn't promise a glow-up. It asks the harder question, if you weren't trying to be better, who would you be? Maybe you weren't meant to become someone else. Maybe you were meant to return to who you've always been. The shift happens when you realize you don't need another routine, not because you're abandoning your own growth, but because you've asked yourself where that desire comes from. Growth doesn't come from becoming the best. It comes from becoming honest with yourself about who you are and what you truly want from life. Not more aesthetic, not more impressive, just more you. Who are you when no one's watching? What if you stop trying to prove you're enough and just let yourself be? What parts of you feel like home, not just highlight reels? Let your practices become gentler. Choose rituals that feel like nourishment, not punishment. Catch yourself when you're stuck in a loop and offer presence instead of another productivity hack. Your highest self isn't always the one who wakes up at 5 a.m. Sometimes she's the one who dares to feel what she's been running from. This was a fragment from the Synaptic Soul Diary. If this moves something in you, let it be felt in a like, a comment, or by subscribing. That's how this story finds more hearts like yours. Turn the page. I'll meet you there.